The sound of shattering glass echoed through the silver dust saloon as Abigail Keller ducked behind the bar, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. It was 1876 in Quartzsite, Arizona Territory, and trouble had just walked through the swinging doors in the form of Harlan Dobbs, the saloon owner who'd made her life a living hell since she'd arrived 6 months ago. "Where's my money, girl?" Harlan bellowed, his whiskey-soaked breath preceding him as he leaned over the counter. "You think I'm running a charity here?" Abigail rose slowly, clutching a rag in her trembling hands. At 22, she'd already seen more hardship than most women twice her age. The drought that had killed her parents' small farm outside of Tucson had left her with nothing but debts and desperation. "I'll have it by the end of the week, Mr. Dobbs. I swear it," she replied, her voice steadier than her nerves. The debt had grown to nearly $300 money she'd borrowed to bury her parents properly and pay off their creditors. Working as a barmaid barely kept her fed, let alone able to chip away at what she owed. "That's what you said last week," Harlan spat, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "I've been patient, Abigail, too patient. Maybe it's time you started working upstairs with the other girls if you can't pay your debts otherwise." The implication made her stomach turn. She'd managed to avoid that fate so far by working twice as hard serving drinks, cleaning rooms, and doing laundry, but Dobbs was losing patience. "Please, Mr. Dobbs, just a little more time." "You've got until Saturday," he growled, slamming his meaty palm on the bar. "Or you'll be entertaining the minors one way or another." The saloon doors swung open again, momentarily flooding the dim interior with harsh afternoon sunlight. A tall silhouette stood framed against the glare, dust from the trail still clinging to his long coat. "Whiskey?" the stranger called, moving toward the bar with the easy, measured gait of a man comfortable in his own skin. As he stepped into the light, Abigail saw a man probably in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark beard was neatly trimmed, unlike the unkempt facial hair sported by most men passing through. "Coming right up," she replied, grateful for the interruption. She poured a generous measure of amber liquid and slid it across the bar. The stranger nodded his thanks, taking a slow sip before setting the glass down. "Isaac Porter," he introduced himself simply, "just rode in from Yuma." "Welcome to Quartzsite, Mr. Porter," Abigail said, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Passing through." "That remains to be seen." His gaze drifted to where Harlan Dobbs was now harassing one of the other barmaids. "Your boss seems like a real pleasure to work for." Abigail glanced nervously in Dobbs' direction. "He has his moments. I bet he does." Isaac Porter took another sip, his eyes never leaving her face. There was something in his gaze that unsettled her, not the usual leering assessment she received from most male patrons, but something more discerning. "You don't belong here." Her chin lifted slightly. "And you know where I belong after 5 minutes of conversation, Mr. Porter." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Fair point, Miss Keller, Abigail Keller, Miss Keller." He nodded, finishing his whiskey in one swallow. "I've got some business to attend to, but I'll be back." "Save me a seat for the poker game tonight. The tables fill up fast," she warned. "But I'll do my best." As he walked away, Abigail found herself watching him longer than was proper. There was something different about Isaac Porter, something that spoke of purpose, rather than the aimless drifting of most who passed through Quartzsite. The evening brought the usual crush of customers miners flush with their week's pay, cowboys passing through, and the town's regulars looking for relief from the monotony of frontier life. The air grew thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. Abigail moved efficiently between tables, delivering drinks and deflecting wandering hands with practiced ease. Isaac Porter arrived as promised, taking a seat at the main poker table. He played with quiet concentration, neither drinking heavily nor engaging in the ribald conversation that flowed around him. Occasionally, his eyes would find hers across the room, a brief connection that somehow felt like a lifeline in the chaos. Near midnight, when the game broke up, Porter was clearly ahead. He collected his winnings without fanfare and approached the bar where Abigail was cleaning glasses. "Seems like luck was on your side tonight," she observed. "I don't much believe in luck," he replied, placing a coin on the counter. "Skill and observation serve better in my experience." "Is that what brought you to Quartzsite? Skill and observation?" She couldn't help her curiosity about this mysterious man. "I'm looking for someone, actually." His voice lowered. "But I find myself distracted by something else entirely." The intensity of his gaze made her flush, and she busied herself wiping down the already clean counter. "Well, it's a small town. If you're looking for someone, they shouldn't be hard to find. I've already found something worth my attention." He tipped his hat slightly. "Good night, Miss Keller." Abigail watched him leave, an odd mixture of apprehension and anticipation settling in her chest. She had no time for distractions. Saturday's deadline loomed over her like a hangman's noose. The next morning brought no relief from her troubles. She had barely slept, calculating and recalculating her meager savings against her debt. Even if she gave every cent she had, she would still be short by over $200. She was sweeping the saloon floor when Dobbs emerged from his office, a ledger in his hands. "I've been reviewing your situation, Abigail," he said, his tone falsely congenial. "I've decided to be generous. You can work off your debt upstairs. 6 months should cover it." Abigail's grip tightened on the broom handle. "I told you I won't do that kind of work, Mr. Dobbs." His face darkened. "Then I expect my money by Saturday, or I'll have the sheriff throw you in jail for theft." He stepped closer, his bulk intimidating. "And once you're locked up, I'll auction off anything you own to recoup my losses. Understand?" She understood perfectly. With no family, no friends close enough to help, and nowhere to run with just a few dollars to her name, Abigail was trapped. "Yes, Mr. Dobbs," she whispered, hating the defeat in her voice. The day crawled by in a haze of dread. By afternoon, the saloon began to fill again, and Abigail moved through her duties mechanically, her mind frantically searching for solutions where there were none. She nearly dropped a tray of drinks when Isaac Porter walked in, looking more rested than the night before. He took a seat at the bar, waiting patiently until she could break away to serve him. "You look troubled today," he observed as she poured his whiskey. "Just tired," she lied, forcing a smile. "Miss Keller," he said, his voice dropping to ensure only she could hear, "I make it my business to know when someone's in trouble, and you're in trouble." She froze, her eyes darting to Dobbs across the room. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." He took a slow sip of his drink. "I overheard your conversation with Dobbs this morning. I came in early looking for you and happened to be in the right place at the wrong time." Heat rushed to her face. "That was a private matter. How much do you owe him?" "Mr. Porter, while I appreciate your concern, how much?" His eyes held her steadily. She swallowed hard. $300, but it's not your problem." "What if I made it my problem?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch, placing it discreetly on the counter between them. "There's $400 there, enough to pay your debt and give you a fresh start." Abigail stared at the pouch, then back at him, suspicion replacing embarrassment. "And what would you expect in return, Mr. Porter? I've already told Dobbs I won't work upstairs, and I won't make that compromise for anyone." A flash of something respect perhaps crossed his face. "I expect nothing that would compromise your dignity, Miss Keller. Consider it a loan if your pride requires it. Why would you help a stranger?" She couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "Perhaps I'm tired of seeing good people crushed under the heel of men like Dobbs." He pushed the pouch closer to her. "Take it, pay him off. We can discuss terms later if you wish." Abigail's hand hovered over the pouch, torn between desperate need and ingrained caution. "I don't understand what you want from me." Isaac leaned forward slightly, his voice even lower. "What I want, Miss Keller, is to offer you a choice that doesn't end with you in jail or forced into a life you don't want." The sincerity in his eyes made her decision. She quickly took the pouch and slipped it into her apron pocket, her heart racing. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll pay you back somehow. I know you will." He finished his drink and stood. "I'll return this evening." Abigail watched him leave, the weight in her pocket both a relief and a new burden. She had no idea who Isaac Porter really was or why he'd chosen to help her, but at that moment she could only feel grateful. When the saloon quieted during the mid-afternoon lull, Abigail approached Dobbs in his office, the money counted and ready. "I have your payment," she announced, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Dobbs looked up from his ledger, surprise evident on his fleshy face. "All of it, $300, as we agreed." She placed the stack of bills on his desk. He counted it slowly, suspicion growing in his eyes. "Where did you get this kind of money so suddenly, girl?" "I've been saving," she lied. "And I sold some family heirlooms I'd been keeping." "Heirlooms," he scoffed. "You came here with nothing but the clothes on your back." "I had them stored with an acquaintance in Tucson." The lies came easier now, fueled by her desperate need to be free of him. "The point is, I've paid my debt. We're square now." Dobbs leaned back in his chair, a calculating look in his eyes. "The debt, yes, but you're still employed here, aren't you, unless you're planning to leave Quartzsite?" "I'll work through the end of the month," she said carefully. "I believe that's customary notice." "Customary," he laughed. "Nothing's customary out here, Abigail, but I'll allow it." He tucked the money into his desk drawer. "2 more weeks, then you're free to go wherever you please." Relief washed through her. "Thank you, Mr. Dobbs." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "One more thing, Abigail. Your mysterious benefactor, tell him to be careful. Quartzsite has ways of dealing with outsiders who stick their noses where they don't belong." She kept her face neutral as she left the office, but inside, a cold fear had taken root. Dobbs wasn't a man who took kindly to being outmaneuvered, and now he'd set his sights on Isaac. The saloon grew rowdier as the evening progressed, but Isaac Porter didn't appear. Abigail found herself watching the door, anxiety growing with each hour that passed. Had Dobbs' threat somehow reached him? Or had he simply moved on, his good deed done? She was wiping down tables after closing when the back door opened quietly. Isaac stood there, hat in hand, looking unharmed but cautious. "You didn't come in tonight," she said, setting down her rag, thought it wise to keep a low profile. "Word travels fast in small towns." He stepped further inside. "Did Dobbs accept the money?" "Yes, I'm free of my debt." She twisted her hands in her apron. "But he knows someone helped me. He made threats." Isaac nodded, unsurprised. "Men like him always do, but I can handle Harlan Dobbs." "You know him?" She hadn't considered that possibility. "I know of him. His reputation extends beyond Quartzsite." He glanced around the empty saloon. "Is there somewhere we can talk more privately? What I have to say shouldn't be overheard." Abigail hesitated, then nodded toward the back stairs. "My room is up there. It's small but private." The impropriety of inviting a man to her room wasn't lost on her, but curiosity and gratitude overrode conventional concerns. She led him up the narrow staircase to her modest quarters, a single room with a bed, washstand, and small trunk containing her few possessions. "It's not much," she said, lighting a lamp. "It's honest," he replied, remaining standing near the door, hat still in hand. "More than can be said for most of this town." Abigail sat on the edge of her bed, the only available seat. "You said you wanted to talk. I'm listening." Isaac seemed to be gathering his thoughts. "I wasn't entirely truthful about why I came to Quartzsite. I am looking for someone, but it's not just anyone. I'm a U.S. Marshal, Miss Keller." Her eyes widened. "A marshal? Are you here to arrest Dobbs?" "Not directly, though I wouldn't mind seeing him behind bars." He leaned against the wall. "I'm tracking a counterfeiter who's been flooding the territory with fake bills. We believe he's operating somewhere in this region, possibly with Dobbs' knowledge or involvement." "And you helped me to get closer to Dobbs." The thought stung more than it should have. "No." His denial was immediate and firm. "I helped you because what he was doing was wrong. My investigation is separate." She studied his face, looking for deception but finding none. "So what happens now?" That depends partly on you. He took a deep breath. I have a proposition for you, Miss Keller, one that might solve both our problems. I'm listening, she said cautiously. I need to establish a presence here that won't arouse suspicion while I conduct my investigation. Dobbs already has his eye on me, which complicates matters. He paused. If I were a man settling down with a wife, looking to start a new life, I'd attract far less attention. Abigail's breath caught as she realized what he was suggesting. Are you proposing a marriage of convenience, Mr. Porter? I am. His gaze was steady. It would give you protection from Dobbs and a way out of Quartzsite when my work here is done, and it would give me the cover I need to complete my investigation. You're asking me to enter into a false marriage with a man I barely know. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. Not false, he corrected. Legal and binding, but with the understanding that once we leave Quartzsite, you would be free to go your own way with a proper divorce if you wish. I would ensure you have the means to start wherever you choose. Abigail stood, needing to move as her mind raced. This is unorthodox, to say the least. These are unorthodox circumstances. He remained where he was, giving her space. You don't have to answer right now. Think about it overnight. And if I refuse, then I'll find another way to complete my work and you'll still be free of your debt. That money was given freely, regardless of your decision. She turned to face him. Why me, Mr. Porter? Surely there are other ways to establish your cover. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Because in the short time I've known you, I've seen a woman of remarkable courage and integrity. Those are rare qualities anywhere, but especially here. He put his hat back on, preparing to leave. And because I find myself caring what happens to you, which is admittedly unprofessional of me. The admission hung in the air between them, unexpected and disarming. I'll think about it, she finally said. Where can I find you tomorrow? I've taken a room at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. I'll come by the saloon in the afternoon. He opened the door. Good night, Miss Keller. After he left, Abigail sat for a long time on her bed, turning the proposition over in her mind. Marriage to a virtual stranger, a lawman on a dangerous mission, no less seemed like trading one precarious situation for another. Yet something about Isaac Porter inspired trust, and the prospect of escaping Quartzsite with dignity intact was tempting beyond words. She slept fitfully, dreams filled with wedding veils and wanted posters, and awoke no closer to a decision. The morning brought unwelcome clarity in the form of Harlan Dobbs, who cornered her in the storeroom before the saloon opened. Your friend Porter, he said without preamble. Who is he really? Abigail kept her expression neutral. Just a traveler passing through as far as I know. Don't play dumb with me. Dobbs moved closer, blocking her exit. No drifter carries that kind of money, and he's been asking questions around town, the wrong kind of questions. I wouldn't know anything about that, she replied, her heart racing. Dobbs' hand shot out, gripping her arm painfully. Listen carefully, Abigail. I've sent word to some associates in Phoenix who might be interested in Porter's activities. If he's who I think he is, he'll be dead by the end of the week. His grip tightened. So if he's offered you any promises, I'd reconsider. He released her with a shove that sent her stumbling against the shelves. 2 more weeks, he reminded her. Then you're either gone from Quartzsite or back in my debt. Understand? Abigail nodded, rubbing her arm where bruises were already forming. As Dobbs left, her decision crystallized with sudden clarity. Whether Isaac Porter was offering a real chance or just another form of danger, it was better than the certainty of what awaited her if she stayed. The hours dragged as she waited for Isaac's arrival. When he finally appeared in the late afternoon, she felt a rush of relief that surprised her with its intensity. He took a seat at a corner table, away from the other patrons. She brought him coffee without being asked, her decision evident in her eyes before she even spoke. Yes, she said quietly, setting down the cup. I accept your proposition. Relief crossed his face. You're certain? As certain as I can be given the circumstances. She glanced nervously around the saloon, but we need to move quickly. Dobbs knows you're asking questions. He's sent for people from Phoenix who he says will kill you. Isaac's expression darkened. When, he said by the end of the week, I don't know how much of it was threat and how much was truth, but I wouldn't underestimate him. He nodded slowly. Then we should be married tomorrow. Can you be ready? The word married sent a jolt through her that was both fear and something else entirely, something she wasn't ready to examine. Yes, I have little to pack. Meet me at the church at noon. I'll speak to Reverend Collins this evening. He reached out, his hand briefly covering hers on the table. Thank you for trusting me, Abigail. The warmth of his touch lingered long after he'd gone, a strange comfort in the uncertainty that lay ahead. That night, Abigail carefully packed her few belongings, 2 dresses besides the one she wore, some undergarments, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, and a small book of poetry her father had given her years ago. Everything she owned in the world fit into a single carpet bag with room to spare. She slept little, alternating between anxious planning and wondering if she'd lost her mind. By morning, exhaustion had given way to a strange calm. She'd made her decision, and whatever came of it, she would face it with the same determination that had carried her through every other hardship in her life. She left the saloon at mid-morning, telling the cook she had errands to run. No one questioned her. She'd never missed a shift in 6 months of employment, and even Dobbs hadn't revoked her limited freedom to come and go during daylight hours. The church sat at the edge of town, a simple whitewashed building that served Quartzsite's God-fearing citizens. Abigail arrived early, her carpet bag clutched tightly in one hand. She'd worn her best dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been quite pretty before time and wear had dulled its color. Reverend Collins greeted her at the door, his kind face revealing nothing of what he might think about this hasty union. "Mr. Porter is waiting inside," he said. "Are you certain about this, Miss Keller? Marriage is not a step to be taken lightly." "I'm certain, Reverend," she replied with more confidence than she felt. Isaac stood near the altar, dressed in clean clothes, his hair neatly combed. When he turned and saw her, something passed across his face that made her breath catch a look of genuine appreciation that went beyond their arrangement. "You look beautiful," he said quietly as she joined him. "Thank you." She glanced down at her worn dress, embarrassed by its simplicity. "I wish I had something more appropriate for a wedding day." "The bride makes the dress, not the other way around," he replied, and the sincerity in his voice made her cheeks warm. The ceremony was brief and simple. They exchanged plain gold bands that Isaac had somehow procured overnight. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac's kiss on her lips was gentle and respectful, brief, but not entirely without feeling. As they signed the marriage certificate, Abigail felt the weight of her new name. Abigail Porter. It felt foreign yet somehow not wholly wrong. They stepped out of the church into the bright Arizona sunlight as a married couple, for better or worse. "We should leave town immediately," Isaac said as they walked toward the livery stable where he'd arranged for horses. Dobbs' friends from Phoenix could arrive any day. "What about your investigation?" she asked. "I've sent word to my superior in Tucson. Another marshal will be assigned." His jaw tightened. "Your safety takes precedence now." Abigail wasn't used to anyone prioritizing her well-being, and the notion was both comforting and disorienting. "Where will we go?" "My family has a small ranch outside Prescott. We'll be safe there while we determine our next steps." He helped her mount a gentle mare he'd purchased for her. "It's 3 days' ride. Are you comfortable on horseback?" "I grew up on a farm," she reminded him. "I can ride." They left Quartzsite with the sun high overhead, taking the northern trail toward Prescott. Abigail didn't look back at the town that had been both her prison and her salvation. Whatever lay ahead, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. They rode until dusk, making good distance before Isaac suggested they make camp in a sheltered area near a small creek. As he built a fire, Abigail found herself watching his movements, efficient, practiced, revealing a man accustomed to life on the trail. "You must have questions," he said as they sat eating a simple meal of beans and jerky. "About me, about what happens now." "Several," she admitted. "Starting with your real name, is it actually Isaac Porter?" He smiled slightly. "Yes, I've found keeping one's real name avoids complications." Isaac James Porter, born in St. Louis, raised in Prescott after my family moved west when I was 12. "How did you become a marshal?" "I served with the Union Army during the war, though I was young, just 16 when I enlisted in '62. Afterward, I worked as a deputy in Prescott before joining the Marshals 3 years ago." He poked at the fire. "My turn. How did a farmer's daughter from Tucson end up indebted to Harlan Dobbs?" Abigail sighed, the memories still raw. "My parents' farm failed during the drought last year. They both took sick fever that swept through the county. Medical bills, funeral costs, I had nothing left. Dobbs was passing through Tucson, heard I was desperate and offered what seemed like a fair arrangement, work at his saloon to repay a loan." Her mouth twisted bitterly. "The interest he charged ensured I'd never get free." "A common enough trap," Isaac said quietly. "I've seen it too many times. And now I'm indebted to you instead," she couldn't help adding. His eyes met hers across the fire. "No. Whatever arrangement we agreed to, I don't consider you indebted. The money was freely given." "Nothing is freely given, Mr. Porter, Isaac. I've learned that much." "Then consider it an investment in justice. Dobbs has exploited too many people for too long." His expression softened. "But between us as husband and wife, however temporary that arrangement may be, there is no debt." The word temporary brought an unexpected pang. "How long do you think we'll need to maintain this marriage?" "Until my investigation is complete and Dobbs is no longer a threat." "A few months, perhaps." He looked away. "After that, as I promised, you'll be free to go wherever you wish with resources to start anew." Abigail nodded slowly, surprised by her reluctance to think that far ahead. "And tonight, I mean," she faltered, embarrassed by what she was trying to ask. Isaac saved her from further awkwardness. "Tonight, and every night until you decide otherwise, you have nothing to fear from me. This marriage may be legal, but I made no assumptions about other aspects." He stood, gathering their tin plates. "I'll sleep on this side of the fire." "You take the bedroll. It gets cold in the desert at night." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in her response. "Thank you." That night, wrapped in Isaac's bedroll while he made do with his saddle and blanket, Abigail found herself studying his profile in the dying firelight. Her husband of mere hours was still largely a mystery, yet she felt safer with him than she had in longer than she could remember. The next 2 days of travel settled into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Isaac proved to be a considerate traveling companion, setting a pace that didn't exhaust her and sharing stories of his work that carefully avoided the more dangerous aspects. In turn, Abigail found herself speaking more freely about her childhood, her parents, and the dreams she'd once harbored before hardship had ground them down. "I always wanted to be a teacher," she admitted as they rode side by side on the second afternoon. "My mother taught me to read and write well, and I had some schooling in Tucson before the farm demanded too much of my time." "Why not pursue that still?" Isaac asked. "You're young and clearly intelligent. Teachers need education themselves, and that costs money," she replied. "And most places won't hire a woman with questionable background." "Working in a saloon doesn't make your background questionable," he said firmly. "And as for education, there are ways. Normal schools that train teachers often provide scholarships." His belief in possibilities she'd long since abandoned stirred something in her, a fragile hope she was afraid to nurture. On the third day, as they crested a hill, Isaac pointed to a valley below where a modest ranch house stood surrounded by pine trees, with grazing land stretching beyond. "There it is. Porter's Crossing, my family calls it, though it's just a small creek that runs through the property." "It's beautiful," Abigail said, genuinely impressed. The setting was peaceful, the house well-maintained though not grand. "My parents live in Prescott now. The ranch was too much for them as they got older." My younger brother manages it with his wife, but they're visiting her family in California for the next month. He glanced at her. Which is fortunate timing for us. We'll have privacy to adjust to our situation. As they approached, Abigail felt a nervous flutter. This was to be her home, however temporarily, with a man who was her husband in name if nothing else. The reality of what she'd agreed to suddenly felt more substantial than it had in the abstract. The house was simple but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. It was clean and well kept, with touches that spoke of a woman's hand in its arrangement. My sister-in-law's influence, Isaac explained as he showed her around. Margaret has a talent for making any space feel like home. It's lovely, Abigail said, running her hand along a patchwork quilt that adorned one of the beds. Which room is yours? This one was mine growing up, he said, indicating the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. You can take the main bedroom. It has a better view of the sunrise. His consideration touched her. Thank you. That evening, after a simple meal that Isaac prepared with surprising skill, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the pines. What happens now? Abigail finally asked, the question that had been hovering between them since they'd arrived. Isaac was quiet for a moment before answering. I need to ride into Prescott tomorrow, report to the marshal's office there. I should also visit my parents, let them know I'm back, though I won't burden them with the full details of our arrangement. What will you tell them? That I met a woman in my travels who needed help and we married quickly. He glanced at her. It's not far from the truth, and me. What should I do while you're gone? Make yourself at home. His gaze was earnest in the fading light. This is your house too, for as long as you want it to be. There are books inside. My mother insisted we all be readers. The pantry is well stocked. Just be comfortable. The genuine concern in his voice made something inside her chest tighten. I'll try. The next morning, Abigail watched from the porch as Isaac rode away toward Prescott, promising to return by nightfall. Alone for the first time in days, she explored the house more thoroughly, running her fingers along the spines of books on shelves, examining family photographs, and learning the rhythms of this new space. She found herself studying a particular photograph, a family portrait showing Isaac, perhaps 5 years younger, standing tall in what she now recognized as his marshal's uniform, alongside an older couple she assumed were his parents and a younger man who shared his features, presumably his brother. They looked happy, united. A real family. The contrast with her own circumstances made her throat tight with an emotion she refused to name. Instead, she busied herself with practical matters, sweeping floors that didn't really need sweeping, organizing a kitchen that was already well organized, doing anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from dwelling on how temporary her place here truly was. Isaac returned as promised, bringing supplies from town and news that made him frown as he unloaded his horse. Dobbs' associates from Phoenix have been spotted in Prescott, he said as they sat down to dinner. They're asking questions about me. Abigail's appetite vanished. How did they trace you here? They likely haven't specifically, but they know I'm a marshal and Prescott has a marshal's office. His expression was grim. It's standard procedure to check in there when I return to the area. Are we in danger? Not immediately. Few people know about this ranch's connection to me. My family uses my mother's maiden name in town for business Walker to avoid complications with my work. He reached across the table, briefly touching her hand. But we should be cautious. No trips into town for you, not until I'm certain it's safe. The days that followed fell into an unexpected pattern of domestic tranquility. Isaac rode into Prescott every few days for supplies and information, while Abigail found herself settling into the role of ranch wife with surprising ease. She cooked, cleaned, mended Isaac's shirts when she found them torn, and gradually filled the silences between them with conversation that moved beyond polite formality. She learned that he played the guitar, though poorly by his own admission, that he had a weakness for apple pie, that he'd once wanted to be a doctor before the war changed his path. In turn, she shared more of herself, her love of poetry, her skill with needlework, the garden she'd tended as a girl. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Isaac returned from town with a package wrapped in brown paper. "For you," he said, handing it to her almost shyly. Inside, Abigail found fabric, beautiful blue cotton with a small floral pattern, enough for a dress along with thread, buttons, and even a length of ribbon. "You mentioned your blue dress was worn," he explained, watching her expression carefully. "I thought perhaps, if you wanted something new." The thoughtfulness of the gesture overwhelmed her. "Thank you," she whispered, running her fingers over the lovely material. No one has given me something like this in a very long time." "You deserve beautiful things," he said simply, then quickly busied himself with storing the other supplies he'd brought, as if embarrassed by his own sentiment. That night, as they sat reading by the fire, a habit they'd developed in the evenings, Abigail found herself watching Isaac over the top of her book. The firelight caught the planes of his face, the slight furrow of concentration between his brows as he read. He'd relaxed around her, no longer the formal lawman but a man in his home, comfortable in his own skin. When he caught her looking, she didn't glance away as she might have days earlier. Instead, she asked the question that had been forming in her mind. "Why haven't you married before now?" "Really married, I mean." Isaac closed his book, considering the question. "The life of a marshal isn't conducive to family. I'm away for months at a time, often in danger." He paused. "And perhaps I never met the right woman until—" He trailed off, then redirected. "What about you?" "No suitors before Quartzsite?" "There was someone once." She set her book aside. "Thomas Green. We were to be married when I turned 18, but then the war came and he enlisted. He died at Shiloh." "I'm sorry," Isaac said softly. "That was a terrible battle." "Yes." She looked into the fire. "After that, there was the farm, my parents' health. Romance seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable but weighted with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Isaac stood, stretching. "It's getting late. I should let you rest." He hesitated, then added, "Good night, Abigail." "Good night, Isaac." As she lay in bed later, listening to the distant sounds of night birds and the occasional creak of the house settling, Abigail acknowledged a truth she'd been avoiding. She was developing feelings for her husband, of convenience, feelings that went beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization was frightening in its implications. Their arrangement had clear boundaries, a predetermined end. Allowing her heart to become involved could only lead to pain when those boundaries were enforced. Yet the next morning, when Isaac smiled at her across the breakfast table, she couldn't stop the warm flutter in her chest or the answering smile that came unbidden to her lips. Days stretched into weeks, and the fabric Isaac had given her became a dress under Abigail's skilled hands. She worked on it during the quiet afternoons when he was tending to the few cattle that remained on the property or checking fence lines. The dress took shape slowly, each stitch a meditation on her changing circumstances. By the time it was finished, nearly a month had passed since their hasty wedding in Quartzsite. She wore it to dinner that night, a simple but well-made dress that fit her properly and brought out the blue in her eyes. The look on Isaac's face when she entered the kitchen made every hour of careful work worthwhile. "You look." He seemed to search for words. "Remarkable." "Thank you." She smoothed the skirt self-consciously. "The fabric is lovely. You chose well. It's not the fabric." His voice was low, his eyes not leaving hers. "It's you, Abigail." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had been building beneath the surface of their pragmatic arrangement. Isaac took a step toward her, then stopped, uncertainty clear in his expression. "Isaac," she said softly, her heart pounding. A pounding at the door shattered the moment. Isaac's hand went immediately to the gun at his hip, a movement so fluid it reminded her forcefully of his true profession. "Stay back," he warned, moving to the window to peek through the curtain. His posture relaxed slightly. "It's my brother James and his wife. They're back early." Abigail's heart sank. Their peaceful isolation was ending, and with it, perhaps, the fragile connection that had been forming between them. Isaac opened the door to greet his brother, a slightly younger, more openly jovial version of himself, and a petite woman with kind eyes who must be Margaret. The surprise and confusion on their faces when they saw Abigail standing in the kitchen was quickly masked by polite smiles. "James, Margaret, this is Abigail," Isaac said, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his voice. "My wife." The stunned silence that followed was broken by James's booming laugh. "You're what?" Isaac Porter, the confirmed bachelor, married, without telling his family. He stepped forward, enfolding Abigail in an enthusiastic embrace. "Welcome to the family, sister, though I admit you've given us quite a shock." Margaret's welcome was more reserved but genuine. "Forgive us for intruding. Had we known Isaac had brought home a bride." "You couldn't have known," Abigail assured her, finding her voice. "It was rather sudden." "The best love stories often are," James declared, clapping his brother on the shoulder. "You dark horse, Isaac." All those years claiming the marshal's life left no room for romance, and here you've gone and proven yourself wrong. Abigail watched Isaac navigate his brother's teasing with practiced ease, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. They were spinning a fiction that would soon be revealed as false, and the realization left a hollow feeling in her chest. Later that night, after an impromptu celebration dinner during which James and Margaret shared stories of their travels and tactfully avoided too many questions about Isaac and Abigail's whirlwind romance, they faced a new complication. "I'll take the small bedroom," Isaac said quietly as they stood awkwardly in the hallway. "You keep the main one. But James and Margaret will think it strange if we don't." She didn't complete the thought, her cheeks warming. "Let them think what they will." His voice was gentle. "I won't make you uncomfortable to maintain appearances." The consideration in his eyes made her decision for her. "We could share the room," she suggested, her heart racing at her own boldness. "Just to sleep. The bed is large enough." Isaac studied her face carefully. "Are you certain?" "Yes," she said, more confidently than she felt. "We're married, after all, even if it's temporary." That night, lying rigid on her side of the bed with Isaac equally still on his, Abigail wondered at her own contradictions. She wanted him closer and feared it at the same time. The warmth of his body nearby was both comfort and torment. "Abigail," he whispered in the darkness, "are you awake?" "Yes. I'm sorry for this complication. James and Margaret weren't supposed to return for another 2 weeks. "It's all right," she assured him. "They seem lovely." "They are." She could hear the fondness in his voice. "But their presence makes our situation more complex. Because now we must truly pretend to be in love," she said, naming the elephant in the room. The silence that followed stretched long enough that she wondered if he'd fallen asleep. Finally, his voice came again, so quiet she almost didn't hear it. "Not all of it would be pretense. Not for me." The admission hung in the darkness between them, momentous and fragile. Abigail's heart thundered in her chest as she processed his words. "Isaac," she began, but he interrupted gently. "You don't need to respond. I shouldn't have said anything." The bed shifted as he turned to face her, though in the darkness she could only make out his silhouette. "But I wanted you to know that whatever began as convenience has become something else, at least for me." She reached out then, her hand finding his in the space between them. "For me as well," she whispered, "though I've been afraid to admit it even to myself." His fingers interlaced with hers, warm and strong. "Where does that leave us?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Your work, your life as a marshal, none of that has changed." "No," he agreed, "but perhaps my perspective on it has." They fell asleep that way, hands joined in the middle of the bed. A small connection that somehow felt more intimate than any physical passion might have been. The next morning brought both awkwardness and a new awareness between them. Over breakfast with James and Margaret, Abigail found herself watching Isaac the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at his brother's jokes. the careful way he listened when Margaret spoke, the occasional glance he sent Abigail's way that carried meaning only they understood. After breakfast, Margaret insisted on showing Abigail around the property, the vegetable garden she maintained, the chicken coop, the small orchard of apple trees just beginning to blossom. "Isaac seems happier than I've ever seen him," Margaret commented as they walked. "More settled." "We haven't been married very long," Abigail demurred, uncomfortable with the deception despite the genuine feelings developing between them. "Sometimes it doesn't take long to know," Margaret replied with a knowing smile. "James proposed to me after 2 weeks. His mother was scandalized, but when you know, you know." Abigail thought of the circumstance that had brought her and Isaac together: desperation, convenience, a business arrangement. Yet somehow, against all odds, something authentic had taken root in that artificial soil. "Yes," she agreed softly, "sometimes you just know." The days that followed were a strange blend of domestic harmony and underlying tension. James and Margaret's presence meant that Isaac and Abigail maintained the appearance of a normal newlywed couple sharing a room, exchanging small touches and glances, sitting close together in the evenings. Yet they had still not crossed the final boundary between performance and reality. Each night they lay side by side, sometimes talking quietly in the darkness, sometimes simply holding hands, but always with that last barrier preserved. A week after James and Margaret's return, Isaac received a telegram from Prescott that brought their comfortable limbo to an abrupt end. "I have to go," he said that night as they prepared for bed. "Dobbs has been spotted in Wickenburg with 2 men from Phoenix. They're still looking for me and they're getting closer." Fear gripped Abigail's heart. "Let another marshal handle it. You said yourself that's what would happen." "It's complicated." He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "The counterfeiter I was originally tracking has been identified. He's working with Dobbs now, likely has been all along. I need to finish what I started." "It's too dangerous," she protested. "If they're actively hunting you, all the more reason to end this before they hurt someone else trying to get to me." His face was set in determined lines she was coming to recognize. "I've arranged for you to stay with my parents in Prescott while I'm gone. You'll be safer there." "When do you leave?" she asked, resignation settling over her like a cold shadow. "Tomorrow morning." He reached for her hand. "I don't know how long I'll be gone, weeks possibly. And if something happens to you," the question that had been haunting her finally escaped. "What then, Isaac?" His fingers tightened around hers. "My family will ensure you're taken care of, whatever happens. You'll never have to worry about your security again." "That's not what I'm asking." Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. "I don't care about security or money, I care about you." Isaac's expression softened. "Abigail," he said, her name almost a caress on his lips. He leaned forward, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I have to do this. Not just because it's my duty, but because until Dobbs is dealt with, neither of us will ever truly be free." She knew he was right, but that didn't ease the fear constricting her chest. "Then make me a promise," she said. "Promise you'll come back to me." Instead of answering with words, Isaac closed the distance between them. His kiss was nothing like the brief, chaste one they'd shared at their wedding. This was deep, urgent, a promise and a plea wrapped into one. Abigail responded with equal fervor, her hands clutching his shoulders as if she could keep him anchored to her by will alone. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I promise," he whispered. That night, there was no pretense between them, no careful distance maintained. They came together as husband and wife in truth, their physical union an echo of the emotional one that had been building since that first day in the Silver Dust Saloon. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Abigail faced the truth she'd been avoiding. She had fallen in love with Isaac Porter, completely and irrevocably. "I love you," she whispered, not sure if he was still awake to hear it. His arms tightened around her. "And I love you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. More than I ever thought possible, morning came too soon, bringing with it the reality of their separation. Isaac dressed in his marshal's uniform, checking and loading his weapons with practiced efficiency while Abigail watched from the bed, memorizing every detail of him. "James will take you to our parents' home later today," he said as he buckled on his gun belt. "They're good people. You'll be comfortable there." "I don't want comfort," she said. "I want you safe." He came to sit beside her on the bed, taking her hands in his. "When this is over, we'll talk about the future, a real future together, if that's what you want." "It is." She squeezed his hands. "More than anything." Their goodbye was brief, but intense, a kiss that carried all the words they didn't have time to say, a promise to return, a silent prayer for safety. Abigail watched from the porch as Isaac rode away, straight-backed and determined until he disappeared over the ridge. The next 2 weeks were an exercise in patience and forced calm. Isaac's parents, John and Alina Porter, welcomed her warmly into their comfortable home in Prescott, though she could sense their curiosity about the sudden marriage their son had entered into. "Isaac has always been independent," Alina commented one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the town in golden light. "When he sets his mind to something, there's no stopping him. I imagine that's how he convinced you to marry him so quickly." Abigail smiled, thinking of how their arrangement had begun. "Actually, I think I might have been the one to convince him." Alina's laugh was warm. "Then you're perfect for him. He needs someone who knows her own mind." Life in the Porter household fell into a comfortable routine. Abigail helped Alina with household tasks, read voraciously from John's extensive library, and gradually shared more of her background, carefully edited to protect Isaac's investigation, but honest about her parents' deaths and her financial struggles. "You've had a difficult road," John observed one evening. "But hardship builds character, and I can see why Isaac was drawn to you. You have strength." His words warmed her, even as worry for Isaac consumed her thoughts each night as she lay alone in the guest bedroom. News came sporadically, telegrams from Isaac saying only that he was well and making progress. Never enough information to ease her mind completely, but enough to let her breathe until the next message arrived. Until one day, no telegram came. One day of silence stretched into 3, then a week. Abigail maintained a calm facade for the sake of Isaac's parents, but inside, fear gnawed at her with sharp teeth. On the 10th day of silence, a knock came at the door late in the evening. Abigail's heart leapt to her throat as John went to answer it, praying it wasn't the news she dreaded most. Instead of a solemn-faced messenger, James Porter stood on the doorstep, his expression grim but determined. "They've got Isaac," he said without preamble. "Dobbs and his men ambushed him near Wickenburg. They're holding him at an abandoned mine outside of town." "How do you know this?" John demanded, his face pale with shock. "One of Isaac's informants got word to the marshal's office in Prescott. They're organizing a rescue, but it'll take time they may not have." James's eyes found Abigail's. "Dobbs sent a message. He wants to trade Isaac for you, Abigail." The room seemed to tilt. "Me, but why would he?" "Revenge," James said flatly. "Apparently you were more than just a debtor to him. Your escape with Isaac humiliated him, cost him standing with his associates. Now he wants to make an example of both of you." "I'll go," Abigail said immediately. "If it will save Isaac, absolutely not," John cut in. "That's exactly what Dobbs wants. He has no intention of releasing Isaac, regardless." "Then what do we do?" The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. "We can't just leave him there," James's expression hardened. "We're not going to." "I rode straight here when I got the news. There's a group of men assembling deputies, some of Isaac's fellow marshals, a few trusted friends, but the official rescue won't move until tomorrow, maybe the day after. Bureaucracy." He spat the word like a curse. "That could be too late," Abigail said, voicing what they all feared. "Yes," James looked at his father, "which is why I'm going tonight, with or without the marshal's blessing." "You'll need help," John said, already moving toward the gun cabinet in his study. "No, Pa," James's voice was firm. "You're needed here, but I won't be going alone," he turned to Abigail. "Isaac would have my hide for even suggesting this, but I could use your help." "My help? How?" "Dobbs knows me. I've visited Isaac in Quartzsite before, but he doesn't know I'm Isaac's brother. If you and I ride in, with you appearing to surrender yourself and me posing as the man delivering you for the bounty Dobbs is offering." "It's too dangerous," Alina protested, speaking for the first time since James had arrived. "It's our best chance," James countered. "We get inside, assess the situation, create a distraction if possible. The others will be positioned nearby, waiting for my signal." Abigail didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Abigail changed into riding clothes trousers borrowed from James's wife and a man's shirt that would allow her to move freely if necessary. James gave her a small Derringer pistol, showing her how to use it. "Only as a last resort," he cautioned, "but I want you to have some protection." They rode out just after midnight, a small group of 6, James and Abigail in the lead, followed by 4 men James trusted: a deputy marshal, 2 experienced trackers, and a former Army scout. They traveled hard through the night, pushing their horses as much as they dared, reaching the outskirts of Wickenburg as dawn broke. The abandoned mine sat in the foothills east of town, a collection of weathered wooden structures surrounding the dark mouth of a tunnel dug into the hillside. From their vantage point on a ridge overlooking the site, they could see 3 men patrolling the perimeter and smoke rising from the main building. "That's where they'll be keeping him," James murmured, studying the layout through a spyglass. "The old office. It's the only building with a secure door." The plan was simple but dangerous. Abigail would ride in with James, ostensibly surrendering herself in exchange for the bounty Dobbs had offered. Once inside, they would assess Isaac's condition and the number of men they faced. The other 4 men would position themselves around the mine, waiting for James's signal, a single shot fired into the air before moving in. "Ready?" James asked as they prepared to ride down. Abigail nodded, swallowing her fear. "Ready." They approached openly, James calling out as they neared the first guard. "Got something Dobbs wants," he shouted. "The Keller woman," the guard leveled his rifle at them. "Stop right there." "Tell Dobbs I'm claiming the bounty," James said, maintaining his pose as a bounty hunter. $500 for the woman who ran off with the marshal." After a tense moment, the guard nodded to another man who disappeared into the main building. Minutes later, Harlan Dobbs himself emerged, his fleshy face twisted in a satisfied smirk. "Well, well," he called, approaching them slowly. "Abigail Keller, or is it Porter now? Your husband's been most uncooperative about answering questions." Abigail's blood ran cold at the implication, but she kept her expression neutral. "Let him go, Harlan. It's me you want." "Oh, I want both of you," Dobbs replied. "But we'll get to that. Bring them in," he ordered the guards. They were escorted into the mine office, a single room with a wooden desk, several chairs, and a pot-bellied stove providing warmth against the morning chill. Isaac was there, tied to a chair in the corner, his face bruised and bloody but his eyes alert. When he saw Abigail, those eyes widened in alarm. "No," he said hoarsely. "Abigail, get out of here now." "Touching," Dobbs mocked. "The hero wants to save his lady love." He turned to James. "And you. How much did she pay you to bring her here?" $500 was the bounty, James replied smoothly. "I expect payment." "You'll get what's coming to you," Dobbs said, his tone making it clear that payment wasn't part of the plan. He gestured to one of his men. "Tie them up with the marshal." Everything happened quickly then. As the guard approached with rope, James drew his hidden gun in one fluid motion, shooting the man in the shoulder. Abigail pulled the Derringer from her boot, aiming it at Dobbs as chaos erupted. "Isaac!" she cried, rushing to his side as James exchanged gunfire with the other men. "Behind you," Isaac warned. Abigail turned to see Dobbs lunging for her, his face contorted with rage. She fired the Derringer without hesitation, the small bullet catching him in the chest. He staggered, looking almost surprised before crumpling to the floor. Outside, the signal shot had been fired, and the sound of approaching horses and shouting men filled the air. James was working to untie Isaac, his movements quick and efficient. "Can you ride?" he asked his brother. "Yes," Isaac grunted, standing unsteadily. His eyes found Abigail's relief and fear mingling in his gaze. "You shouldn't have come." "I couldn't leave you," she said simply. The aftermath unfolded in stages. The marshals who had been following at a distance arrived in force, overwhelming the remaining members of Dobbs' gang. Harlan Dobbs himself survived his wound, though barely, and was taken into custody along with his associates. The counterfeiting plates that had been the original object of Isaac's investigation were found hidden in the mine, bringing the case to a successful, if unorthodox, conclusion. Isaac's injuries, while painful, were not life-threatening cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, numerous cuts and bruises. The doctor in Wickenburg patched him up with stern instructions to rest, which Isaac predictably ignored. "We need to get back to Prescott," he insisted as soon as he could stand without wincing. "My parents will be worried sick." The journey back was slow, accommodating Isaac's injuries. Abigail rode beside him, watching him carefully for signs of distress he would never voluntarily show. "You could have been killed," he said quietly as they made camp the first night, the others giving them space around the fire. "So could you," she countered. "Would you have done any differently if our positions were reversed?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes studying her face in the firelight. "No," he finally admitted. "I would have done exactly the same." He reached for her hand. "You were incredible, Abigail. Brave beyond anything I could have expected." "I was terrified," she confessed, "but not of Dobbs or his men. I was terrified of losing you." Isaac brought her hand to his lips. "When I was tied up in that room, thinking I might never see you again, I realized something. All those years I believed I couldn't have both my work and a family. But with the right partner, perhaps I can." "What are you saying?" she asked, her heart beating faster. "I'm saying that this marriage that began as convenience has become the most important thing in my life." His eyes held her steadily. "I'm saying that I want it to be real, permanent, if you'll have me." "I already have you," she reminded him softly. "For better or worse, remember, this time with no conditions, no temporary arrangements." He winced slightly as he shifted position, but his gaze never wavered. "Just us building a life together wherever that might lead us." "Yes," she said simply, "that's what I want too." The return to Prescott brought tearful reunions with Isaac's parents, who had been half-mad with worry despite the telegrams James had sent updating them on the situation. For days, Isaac was the reluctant center of attention as he recovered, fussed over by his mother, congratulated by fellow lawmen, teased mercilessly by his brother through it all. Abigail remained by his side, no longer feeling like an outsider in this family but truly a part of it. A month after the events at the mine, with Isaac mostly healed and Harlan Dobbs awaiting trial in the territorial prison, they stood together on the porch of the ranch house at Porter's Crossing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "What happens now?" Abigail asked, echoing the question she'd posed weeks earlier when their relationship had still been undefined. Isaac's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close against his side. "Now we live, Mrs. Porter, we simply live. And your work as a marshal." It was the question that had hovered between them, unresolved. "I've requested a permanent posting in Prescott," he said. "Less traveling, more time at home. It means a promotion, actually supervising other marshals rather than always being in the field myself." Joy bloomed in her chest. "You do that, for us, without hesitation." He turned to face her fully. "And there's something else. The school board in Prescott is looking for a teacher for the new term. I might have mentioned that my wife has always dreamed of teaching." Abigail's breath caught. "Isaac, I don't have the proper training. The chairman of the board is an old friend of my father's. He's willing to give you a chance with some additional training over the summer." His eyes were bright with hope for her. "You could have your dream, Abigail." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude for how completely her life had transformed. From the desperate barmaid in Quartzsite to a marshal's wife with the prospect of becoming a teacher, all because one good man had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. "Thank you," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. "For everything." Isaac's arms wrapped around her, secure and strong. "No," he murmured against her hair. "Thank you for taking a chance on a marriage of convenience. I think it's turned out to be rather convenient indeed." Abigail laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful ranch as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I think that might be the understatement of the year, Marshal Porter." 5 years later, the schoolhouse in Prescott buzzed with the energy of children eager for summer vacation. Abigail Porter stood at the front of the classroom, watching her students complete their final examination of the term, pride swelling in her chest at how far they had come. When the last paper was collected and the children dismissed with shouts of joy and promises to return in the fall, Abigail gathered her things and stepped out into the June sunshine. Isaac waited for her at the bottom of the steps, their 3-year-old son Thomas balanced on his shoulders and their infant daughter Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in a sling across his chest. "How was the last day, Mrs. Porter?" he asked, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Wonderful and exhausting as always." She reached up to ruffle Thomas's dark hair, so like his father's. "How were they for you? Thomas helped me in the garden, didn't you, partner?" Isaac swung the giggling boy down from his shoulders. "And Eliza here slept through most of her brother's adventures." They walked home together through the streets of Prescott, a respected U.S. Marshal, now supervising the district, a beloved teacher, and their 2 children. Neighbors greeted them warmly, a far cry from the suspicious glances Abigail had once received in Quartzsite. Their house sat on a quiet street not far from the school, a comfortable home with a garden Abigail tended lovingly, and a porch where they often sat in the evenings, watching the stars come out while their children slept. That night, after the children were in bed, they sat on that porch, Abigail's head resting on Isaac's shoulder as they enjoyed a rare moment of quiet. "I received a letter today," Isaac said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Harlan Dobbs died in prison last week." Abigail absorbed the news, surprised by her lack of emotion. "I can't find it in myself to mourn him." "Nor I," Isaac agreed, "but I find myself oddly grateful to him in a way. Grateful to Dobbs." She looked up at him in disbelief. "If he hadn't threatened you that day in Quartzsite, I might never have intervened. We might never have met." He took her hand, running his thumb over the gold band on her finger. "Sometimes the worst circumstances lead us to the best places." Abigail considered this, thinking of the desperate young woman she'd been, working in a saloon to survive, and the fulfilled wife, mother, and teacher she'd become. "I suppose you're right," she conceded. "Though I prefer to give credit to the man who paid my debt and offered his name, rather than the one who caused the trouble in the first place." Isaac chuckled, pulling her closer. "Fair enough." As the stars emerged above Porter's, crossing the ranch, now thriving under James's management, but still a place they visited often, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From desperate beginnings to this abundant life, filled with love and purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "Just how fortunate I am," she replied. "How one moment of courage accepting your help, taking a chance on an arrangement that seemed so pragmatic, changed everything. For both of us," he said softly. "I went to Quartzsite looking for a counterfeiter and found the other half of my heart instead." As the night deepened around them, Abigail Porter rested in the security of her husband's embrace, grateful beyond words for the saloon she'd worked in to survive, the cowboy who'd paid her debt, and the name that had become not just a convenient disguise but the truest expression of who she was meant to be.